Hi there, and welcome to The Daily Gardener, an almanac of garden history, literature, and small botanical joys. I'm Jennifer Ebling, and today is March 5th. There are days in the gardening year when the world feels especially fragile. Not because the garden is failing, but because it's always been vulnerable. Today's stories ask a quiet question. What does it take to protect beauty, and then to share it? Here's today's garden history. It was on this day in 1534 that the Italian Renaissance painter Antonio Allegri da Correggio died. Correggio painted at the edge of the Renaissance, when the world was full of straight lines and hard borders. And then he did something radical. He softened the frame. In Correggio's work, nature isn't background. It's atmosphere, humidity, breath, a living presence that presses in close. Art historians talk about his use of sfumato, that smoky blending of edges, and chiaroscuro, light and shadow working like weather. But gardeners understand this without vocabulary. We know the way a garden looks in fog, the way petals glow at dusk, the way a scene becomes felt before it becomes seen. Correggio's painting, Jupiter and Io, became famous for that same kind of sensory closeness, a moment of myth held inside a swirl of a cloud. And tied to that myth is a small botanical legend, that violets were born from Io's tears. The Greek name for violet, ion, echoes through centuries of symbolism. Humility, devotion, quiet persistence. When you see a violet peeping through the leaf mold this spring, don't just see a flower. See a tear that turned into a comfort. It's the smallest reminder that nature has a way of transmuting sorrow into something sweet-scented. Correggio didn't paint formal gardens, but he changed how Europe imagined nature. Not as a stage set, not as a decoration, as something alive, as something that moves, something you can almost smell. And that shift from rigid to breathing would ripple forward into later landscape art, and eventually into how whole eras designed beauty, less like geometry, more like air. And it was on this day in 1637 that the Dutch painter and inventor Jan van der Heyden was born. Jan is one of those rare figures who makes gardeners nod in recognition, because he understood two truths at once. The garden can be exquisitely ordered, and the world can still burn. Jan painted Dutch estates with astonishing precision, formal hedges, clipped geometry, shining canals. His views of the house in the woods preserve an entire era of garden design: parterres, paths, pavilions, and the patient symmetry of human control. And if you look closely, you can often see the labor that made that order possible. Gardeners working, while aristocrats stroll. Jan didn't romanticize the garden into pure leisure. He showed the maintenance, the work, the cost. But here's what makes him unforgettable. In 1672, he and his brother developed a leather hose that could deliver water with precision, not buckets, not chaos, but a directed stream that could actually save a structure. He later published a firefighting manual, the Brandspuiten Book, filled with engravings showing old methods and new. And suddenly, the garden becomes part of the story. Because before hoses, a fire didn't just take the house. It took the trees, the hedges, the parterres, everything near enough to catch. Jan's invention didn't just protect architecture, it protected landscapes. It protected the long work of gardeners from a single spark. Jan understood something gardeners still know. It takes decades to grow a hedge and only minutes to lose it. And there's a strange poetry there. A man who painted perfect calm and spent the other half of his life studying destruction so calm could survive. In today's Unearthed Words, we hear from the American poet Lucy Larcom, born on this day in 1824. Lucy grew up inside the machinery of the Industrial Revolution, a mill girl in Lowell, Massachusetts. 14-hour days, noise and lint and rules. And yet, she made herself a garden anyway. She pasted clippings of nature poems onto the frame of her window seat, a secret library, a paper refuge, a small act of defiance. Later, she wrote words that still feel like a key in the pocket of anyone who has ever loved a landscape they didn't own. Lucy wrote, "I do not own an inch of land, but all I see is mine. The orchards and the mowing fields, the lawns and gardens fine." Lucy reminds us that beauty is not only for the deed holder. Sometimes the truest ownership belongs to the person who looks with appreciation. It's time to grow that garden library with today's book, The Almanac by Leah Leandertz. This book is part of Spring Awakening Week here on The Daily Gardener. It's a collection of books that are chosen to mark the moment when gardeners shift from watching to waiting, from dreaming to doing. Leah's beautiful almanac reads like a year-long practice of noticing. Not big proclamations, small, steady observations. What changes in the light? What stirs at the edge of a hedgerow? What returns quietly before it ever announces itself in bloom? It's the kind of book that pairs well with fragile seasons, when the world feels easily damaged, and you need the reminder that simply noticing the garden is a form of protection. Because a garden isn't only made with tools, it's made with the daily act of looking closely enough to see what's growing and what is being saved. And finally, here's something sweet to ignite the little botanic spark in your heart. It was on this day, March 5th, in 1866, that the American philanthropist Anna Scripps Whitcomb was born. She was known as the Orchid Queen of Detroit. Anna is one of those rare figures whose legacy is still blooming, literally. Her name lives on in the Anna Scripps Whitcomb Conservatory on Belle Isle in Detroit. By the mid-20th century, the conservatory needed saving. Instead of keeping her world-class orchids private, Anna moved them into public trust. Hundreds of plants, a living inheritance. And during World War II, Anna became a kind of quiet botanical rescuer, acquiring rare orchids as bombings threatened collections in England. Think of those orchids crossing a dark Atlantic, fragile travelers seeking safe harbor. It's easy to think of orchids as luxury. Anna turned them into something else, a public wonder, a shared classroom, a shelter of glass where beauty is still protected and then offered. As we close the show today, remember, beauty is a fragile thing, but when it's protected with attention, with care, with intention, it becomes enduring. Correggio taught us how to feel nature as atmosphere. Jan van der Heyden built the means to protect it from destruction. Lucy Larcom claimed beauty as a human right, seen and loved, even without ownership. And Anna Scripps Whitcomb used wealth, not to fence beauty in, but to open the gates. Thanks for listening to The Daily Gardener, and remember, for a happy, healthy life, garden every day.